Welcome back to the History with Ali podcast. I'm Ali Harrison, and today I'm interviewing Sasha Marks, the Tudor astrologist. Her account, Tudor Astrology, explores the many ways events of the Tudor period intersected with astrological timing. She also dives deep into the personal astrology of major Tudor figures in this interview, specifically Mary I and Elizabeth I, offering a deeper understanding of who they were. This interview is split into two parts, and you're going to want to listen to both. Enjoy. Sasha, thank you so much for joining me today to have a conversation about Tudor astrology.
Thank you.
So can you tell me a little bit, you're a fellow American. We didn't really learn too much about the Tudors in school. How did you come to be so passionate about the Tudors?
Oh, I think my entry into the field of Tudor history was, as with many other people, remember the original BBC production of The Six Wives of Henry VIII that came out in the 70s? I don't know if you wouldn't remember maybe watching it at that time, but you know what I'm talking about, the one with Keith Michelle and Dorothy Tutton as Anne Boleyn, that one. That basically began it all for me, as it did for many people, I think. It was such a fabulous production. And concurrent to that was also the movie Anne of the Thousand Days with Geneviève Bujold and Richard Burton. So that was a moment. I would say it probably is the moment when a revival in Tudor history began for many, many people. All of a sudden, books came out and other movies came out, and people just were really interested in the topic, even in the US. And so I would say that evolved from that moment. And for me too, obviously, I wasn't full time studying it, I was doing other things, but it kept being the major interest in my life, and especially Anne Boleyn, but also everybody else in the period too. So that was the beginning for me.
And then how did you get into astrology?
Well, concurrently to my interest in the Tudors as a teenager, I started astrology the way many people begin astrology back then, which is Linda Goodman's book, Sun Signs, which was also in that time period a revival of astrology. I would say that both Tudor history and astrology were kind of dormant earlier before that. And then there was this moment where that topic and subject burst onto the scene. And I read that book, which is an extremely well-written book. I mean, it was so interesting. And then I also, again, did not do it full time because I was doing other things and going to college and teaching English in Germany and all of that kind of stuff. But it always was there. And I always started to collect books, and basically throughout my life reading both on the Tudors and on various astrological subjects. And at some point, when I knew enough about both of them, I was able to put them together. I didn't really think about that before that, but you have to get to a certain understanding of the era, and then you have to get to a certain understanding of astrological methodology, and then you can maybe work them together. It takes some time to do that, and it took a long time for me because like I said, never did it full time, but it was always an ongoing passion.
Was there a particular moment when you were like, wow, astrology just came up with the Tudors, like my two
Well,
passions have come together?
I think the first thing was, I think I looked up the chart of Henry VIII. I think that was probably a moment right there. And then I started to think about astrology, not so much. I mean, yes, as far as looking at the charts of people, because that is an important part of astrology. One of my teachers once said something that I really resonate with. The next best thing to having dinner with someone, a person in history, is to look at their chart, because then you get this insight into them that you might get if you were in a conversation with them, you were sharing a meal with them, if you knew them personally. So there is that element. So I started to look up charts of people like Elizabeth I, people who they have charts for. Henry VIII, that kind of thing. But there's another part of astrology that people don't really practice that much in popular astrology. Popular astrology is all about sun signs, and then it goes a little bit into chart analysis. But astrology really is a matrix for timing. The movements of the cycles of the planets are the timing of events. And when I started to look at the Tudor era, let's say where it began in the Battle of Bosworth Field in 1485 to where it ended, and I started to look at the cycles of Jupiter and Saturn and Pluto in that area, in that time frame, then you start to see things and you start to understand why this development happened or why this came about. And there is, interestingly enough, if you are familiar with Pluto in astrology, it is the longest turning planet. It's in a sign for 20 to 30 years. And it really is the transformational, generational planet. When the Tudor era began in 1485, Pluto was in Libra at 13-degree Libra on the day of the Battle of Bosworth Field. The whole re-emergence of the interest in the Tudors in the 70s and 80s concurred with Pluto being in Libra. So we are now following Pluto where it was going through the Tudor era. And for example, Pluto just went into Aquarius last year. Well, Pluto went into Aquarius in 1532 when Henry VIII married Anne Boleyn. So we're level with that moment. So we are, as an era, as a phenomenon, as a mundane phenomenon, meaning worldly phenomenon, we are mirroring the transit of Pluto. And so basically, when Pluto was in the signs that it was in during the Tudor era for that 118 years, we're in those signs with Pluto right now. And that, I would say, is in some way indicative of a huge interest in that period, because people are trying to, even if they don't know they're doing that, they're trying to find themselves now by looking at when was there a similar phenomenon. And I think that even without astrology, you could sit there and find a number of similarities between our world today and the world of the Tudors. The increase in consciousness, you could probably go and say that the beginning of the printing press is very similar to the beginning of the internet and AI. You could say that the current destabilization we're feeling right now is probably not much different than what people felt when they dissolved the monasteries. Do you see what I mean? There's many, many similarities between that age and our age. So we are basically mirroring it through the transit of Pluto. And so that would be another reason why not only me, but lots of people, many, many people are interested in that era. You have to account for all the books and all the movies and all the websites and all the Instagram accounts and the entire Tudor community in some way as a current phenomenon. And I would say that would be probably one way to look at it.
I think that that's really powerful. That's very meaningful, because we really do have such a large Tudorverse community. So that's really beautiful that there can be those parallels. Like,
oh, there are always. And that's the thing. We think we live in a linear chronology because that is how our consciousness takes hold of our environment. And that is what keeps us sane, thinking that we have a yesterday and a today and a tomorrow, and basically a linear chronology. But we actually have that chronology within larger cycles. And it's these cycles that rhyme, not necessarily the individual details, but the cycles rhyme. And to understand that we move through cycles, and when the cycle is done, it goes to a different cycle, is a good way to understand that it's not random. There are ways that you can chart these cycles. In fact, one definition of the planets is just that they make these invisible cycles visible. that's what they do. They are, by following the cycles, you can see what's coming. You can see what kind of moment you're in. So that is a way to basically relate to the larger whole as an individual. So yes, thank you.
That's really incredible. I'm excited to see your work be recognized because it's interdisciplinary
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's very original. I'm a bit in academia. I'm an adjunct media professor and this really sounds like my cup of tea. And I
Oh, well,
think
thank
there's
you.
a lot of room for this conversation. But for our listeners, how did the Tudor monarchs use astrology?
Well, I don't think they used it very well because I have now been studying this forever, a long time. And to be honest with you, the only person that used astrology in a very important and significant way that was actually successful is Elizabeth I having John Dee do his coronation chart. And we all know that she had him do that. And it is really a perfect chart. I mean, in many, many ways. But basically, astrology back then, in the Tudor time, had nothing to do with your sun sign. It had nothing to do with, so what are you? Oh, I'm a Capricorn. It had nothing to do with that. This is popular astrology that came about in the 20th century. It was not how it was used back then. The job of the court astrologer, where there was one, was to elect timing, was to look and find the right moment to do something, get married, be crowned, meet up with this person, go to war. I think Margaret of Austria's father, Maximilian, used astrology for battles and wars and all of those kinds of things. But if you look at all the coronations, starting with Henry VII and going on to Elizabeth, if you look at all the marriages, I would say that almost nobody really employed anybody to really pick those moments because they're very, very bad on a lot of levels. And there are rules in electing a moment. And the most important celestial force to elect a moment is the moon. And because the moon moves around very, very fast, it goes in through a sign in 2.5 days, and it moves around the entire sky in 28 days, as we know. And so what you do is you find where the moon is functioning well, and you basically pick your moment for when it's functioning well. And so there are all kinds of rules. For example, the rule should be that the moon should not be a complete new moon. It should at least have a day. So you don't pick a moment where the moon is dark in the sky because it's not yet potent enough to work for you. And you don't pick a moment when the moon is not in its best energy. And yet they did. They did this over and over again. And I've written a lot of posts on it, and it would be fun to go through all the mistakes they made. But my feeling is either they had astrologers that didn't know what they were doing, or they didn't have somebody pick that day for them. They just used a different reason to choose a day. Henry VIII chose his coronation day with Catherine of Aragon as, was it Midsummer's Day or something? It was something like that. There were other holidays that they may have chosen instead, but then they didn't get the astrology right. And then there's all kinds of challenges because the idea in picking a date is the way something begins will carry the theme of that moment. That's why you choose a beginning moment. The way something begins, the theme of that moment will be carried through its lifespan. So, to answer your question, I'm actually amazed that I don't find a lot of better work. But maybe if they had, the entire Tudor age would not be so interesting. Because who is going to say, okay, we're going to pick a date that will allow you to break from Rome or something like that? You know what I mean? It would have maybe run more smoothly if they had picked better moments. But what we ended up with was a very tumultuous era that changed many, many things, and not by their own volition either. It kind of just came up. So that, I hope, answers that question. I think John Dee was the only person who really knew what he was doing, who chose a moment for Elizabeth that was actually phenomenal. And obviously, he did her a very good turn.
So I listened to your interview, I think, with the Ill-Fated Wives of Henry
Oh,
VIII
yes.
podcast, and you said something that could be groundbreaking in the field that thrilled me, which was that we might be able to find Anne Boleyn's birth date through some of the charts that were made when Henry VIII was trying to find out the sex of the child, which ended up going wrong. Do you think that her birth date is buried somewhere here?
Well, I have a theory on Anne Boleyn's birth date. I am doing work right now on the Boleyns. And what I'm doing, actually, I got the idea really from Hilary Mantel, who has a little section in Wolf Hall where she has Cromwell sitting with Kratzer, the astronomer at the court of Henry VIII. And Cromwell says, I don't have a date of birth, so I don't have a fate. And Kratzer says, well, we can work you back. In other words, an astrologer can take where Cromwell is now at 50 years old and work back to where he probably began, where his life began. And so I actually did that with Cromwell, and I came to a date of October 30th, 1485, and I have a whole lot of reasons why that date works. But at any rate, it's a speculative date. I'm not putting out there that was his birth date, but it's a good chart for him based on how his life unfolded. And I'm doing the same thing with Anne Boleyn right now, and with the Boleyns at large as a family. And what you can do is you can work back through all of the events and when they occurred, and then look at the timing of those events. And what you will see, and what I have seen, is a pattern. There's a pattern there of particular signs and particular degrees every single time in all of the major moments of their life, starting with Thomas Boleyn and with Mary and going with George and Anne as well up to 1536, and then up to the deaths of Thomas a few years later. So by charting that, you can pretty much make what you would call an educated guess. It's not necessarily saying here is their date of birth, because you can't really do that. But you can make a hypothesis. You can make an educated guess that they are most likely this. And that is, my account now has a whole series of posts explaining that and what I think it is. And I'm still working on it. I'm still developing it. But coming back to what you were saying, yes, at the time that Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn asked an astrologer about their child, they probably did know Anne's date of birth. And they probably did look at something in her chart. But it also could be that the other form of astrology that was practiced wasn't just electional, it was also what we call horary, which is you ask a question, and the minute you ask an astrologer a question like, will I get this job? Or will I marry this person? Or back in the day, they probably asked a question like, will I die of plague? Or is my ship coming in with all my goods from the Orient? But basically, you ask a question, and the minute the astrologer gets the question, that becomes the beginning moment. And that then they cast a chart for that moment. And whatever is rising becomes the person who asked the question. And that planet, who is the planet of that rising sign, whether it's Jupiter or Saturn or Mars or whatever, becomes the querent, the person asking the question. So Henry VIII would become the querent the minute he asks the question. And then the way that querent is positioned in the chart and the way the moon moves to it would give you a yes or no answer. And this is a practice that people are still doing, but it's gone a bit out of favor in popular astrology. We're more egocentric and want to know about ourselves more. But that was the other use of astrology, was horary. And when they got the answer, my feeling has always been that they did see a great monarch or a great child come into being, but they couldn't imagine that it could possibly have been a girl. So they said it had to be a son. Do you know what I mean? They saw that. I don't know what they saw because we don't have the charts of the question, but it could have been the moon moving to Jupiter or something like that. Something that represents something large and big and successful. And the assumption just was that it would be a boy, or like almost any advisor to any person in power, they just basically told them what they wanted to hear and hoped for the best. You know what I mean? Basically.
Absolutely.
You
So
know?
you sent me Mary and Elizabeth's chart, and I
Mhm.
would love to get into that. Should we start with Mary chronologically?
Yes, yes, let's do that. I have them here too, the chart of Mary and the chart of Elizabeth. And I kind of thought that this would be good because Mary and Elizabeth, they're really, first of all, they're two women who became queens, but they really encompass many of the themes that run through the Tudor era. If you wanted to make the Tudor era into a epic poem, for example, or a big novel by Tolstoy or something like that, you would have recurring themes that come up as leitmotifs. That's a kind of poetic methodology to bring something again and again and again throughout and resolve it in a certain way. Certainly, one of the themes was the theme of legitimacy versus illegitimacy, right? That's a major theme. And it began actually when Richard III thought that the princes weren't legitimate and usurped the crown and put them in the Tower. But then he is conquered by a person from an illegitimate branch of the family. So there's your first great twist of irony right there. Then you go to Henry VIII and the need for the legitimate son. And then he makes his two daughters illegitimate through the breakup of the marriage with their mothers. And they go along with that stain on them because at that time that was more of a stain than it would ever be today. And then the two illegitimate girls ascend to the throne and become the first queens. So there's that whole twisting and turning with the theme of illegitimacy. Then you have the gender theme, the son that was so important. And here are the women that become the daughters that become the queens. And then finally, you have the theme of marriage is the final theme. The Tudor dynasty began with an important marriage between Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. And I believe actually today is the anniversary of that, the 18th of January. So it began with a marriage that cemented the dynasty. But then look at all the marriage shenanigans going on with Henry VIII. He is notorious for the six wives. And then you had Mary make a marriage that was very unpopular. And then you had Elizabeth refuse to marry. So by focusing on Mary and Elizabeth, you actually get on all of these major themes of the entire age. So yes, so let's look at them. I don't want to go too detailed in astrological weeds because maybe some of your readers, your viewers might not know it. I want to keep it as simple as possible. So I'm going to look at what they shared and how it was different. That's
Wonderful.
that's probably the best way to do it. What did they have in common and how were they different from each other that accounts for how their lives, not only how their lives you know, developed and panned out, but also how we see them today. Because nothing in astrology dies. So whatever the moment is for them is still there. It still resonates. So the very first thing, I don't know if you looked at their chart, but one very interesting thing is, do you see that they both have as a rising sign 6-degree Capricorn? Both of them. Now, Mary was born on February 18th, 1516 at 4:13 a.m. in the morning. And Elizabeth was born on September 7th, 1533 at about 2:54 in the afternoon. So very far apart, nowhere near together in time. And yet, at the moment that each one was born, Capricorn was rising at exactly 6 degrees.
Wow.
So that is immediately something that they shared. They shared the starting point, which is the ascendant of their chart. It marks the cusp of the what you would call the first house or the chart. And what is the ascendant for anybody who doesn't know? It is at the moment you're born, the sun is wherever the sun is rising in the east, the sign and degree of that moment is your ascendant, and it becomes how you dawn on people. It is your dawn, and it's how you dawn on people and how people see you. It's your beginning moment. It's not the sun, it's just your beginning moment in your chart. So I think that's, first of all, incredibly phenomenal that they both share that they both not only have Capricorn rising, but 6 degrees Capricorn rising. So your immediate interpretation of that is, in one way or another, they're going to be in the same boat.
That's fascinating.
They're going to be in the same boat one way or another. And they are. They are both the unwanted daughters, not that they weren't wanted at the time, but they were not enough. They are both the insufficient daughters that didn't solve the dynasty problem for their father. They both had mothers that were then discarded and treated badly. They both suffered great trauma over it, and they were both declared illegitimate. And all of that is contained in their exact same rising moment. So basically, what happens is the planet that is in charge of the sign on the ascendant becomes your ruling planet. So who is in charge of Capricorn? It's Saturn. They are both daughters of Saturn. And Saturn in the Tudors especially, and even still today, but more back then, was very much a malefic energy. People did not like Saturn. I mean, basically, Saturn was the last planet you could see with the naked eye, and therefore Saturn became the limitation, the restrictive energy, death, the Grim Reaper, all of that. Today we look at Saturn a little more charitably. We say, well, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and we all have challenges, and life is, when Saturn is that taskmaster that makes you work hard and do things you don't want to do, like go to the dentist or study or pass your exams, those kinds of things. So we look more charitably today on Saturn than they did back then. But back then, Saturn was basically the greater malefic, and you're trying to avoid Saturn wherever you can. So the fact that they are both daughters of Saturn is not surprising, because that is pretty much the same as being the daughter of Henry VIII. I mean, isn't it? Wasn't he the malefic force on their lives?
Yes, and because of the illegitimacy, there's even the question of, are they really sisters? And to me, this similarity in their chart, it kind of works towards that connection.
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
yeah.
There's no question about that. There's no question about that. So that's the beginning. So that means that their houses, and let me just explain very briefly on what a house is in astrology. There's 12 of them. Do you remember in your psychology class where maybe the psych teacher said something about how you play different roles? Like at home, you would be the wife or the mother or the husband. With your parents, you play the role of the daughter or the son. At work, you play the role of the boss or the employee. You know what I mean? We all have in our psyches different compartments. We may not even be the same person when we are a wife as we are when we are an employee or a boss or a daughter or a son, Well, the houses are like that. The houses are the different areas of your life. So the chart is divided into 12 such areas. and where the planets or the energies are living in which areas are the ones that are of most interest, although basically we are all complete people and we all have everything. But obviously there's concentration in certain areas which give us the themes we have in our life that we're most focused on. So the houses that are going to be important for Mary and Elizabeth are going to be the eighth house, which is a very psychological, deep sort of house of transformation. And we'll get to that when we go there. The 11th house, which is the house of Hampton Court. In all Tudor charts, the 11th house is Whitehall and Greenwich and Hampton Court. It's the court, it's the area of life where you're functioning with your politics and your groups and your different factions and which faction are you a part of and all of that kind of thing. The 11th house is very, very strong in the Tudor era. In fact, Henry VIII has his sun in Cancer in the 11th house. So that's the center for politics, for the actual day-to-day activities like that. And the other house that's going to be important for the two queens is the 7th house of marriage, obviously. Okay, so now we're bringing all the themes together in these particular areas of the chart. I mean, we could talk forever on their charts, but I have to kind of winnow it down to just the most important thing. So when Mary was born, let's start with Mary, because she has something that Elizabeth has as well, and we're going to look at that. That's the good place to compare and contrast them. Did you know that Mary was born on a full moon?
No, I didn't. That's
She
interesting.
did. She did. And not only when we look at the moon in the sky, we see the moon full for a few days, I mean, a day or two. But actually, there's only a 2-hour period where the moon is full exact, where the opposition of a full moon is an opposition of sun and moon. And what's happening is that the sun is fully illuminating the moon by being directly opposite it. So there's only a very short moment, a moment of about 2 hours, where that opposition is exact. And it was exact at 4:13 a.m. when Mary was born. I'm sure Catherine of Aragon didn't see it because I'm sure she had her room all closed up and the curtains drawn and wasn't looking outside the window. But if she had looked outside the window or was able to see it, it would have been a bright full moon that was high in the sky. And not only that, but exact at 8 degrees each. So in astrology, the more exact the aspect is, the stronger it is. You could be on a full moon and have a variance of 10 degrees, but Mary actually had it in the moment. So that means this full moon for Mary was a very important astrological signature. And what a full moon, when you carry a full moon inside you, when you're born on a full moon, that means you have an opposition inside you, an opposition between the sun and the moon. And that opposition is a polarity. It's a conflict that is difficult to reconcile. Because which side are you going to go on? Are you going to go to the side of the sun, or are you going to go to the side of the moon? And they pull you in different directions. So basically, the theme of Mary's full moon is Pisces and Virgo, because her sun on February 16th, February 18th, I keep getting the 16 and the 18. One is the year, one is the day. On the day that she was born, the sun was in Pisces. Remember, we are in the Julian calendar, so everything is a 10-day difference to what we have today. Today, February 18th would be Aquarius, but back then it was already in Pisces. So the Pisces sun is what gives her the compassion, the empathy, the mystical kind of way of being, the complete devotion that she has to God, to her mother. Pisces is a sign that is without boundaries. When you are in the Pisces area of life, you are like in the ocean. You are like in that place that is beyond the structures. Pisces has no structure. So that's why people who have a lot of Pisces energy can be very creative, very artistic, very empathetic, all of that because they are able to move around. They don't put up too many barriers like that. You know what I mean? Pisces energy is a spiritual energy, and it has a conflict in and of itself because it is the two fishes that face in opposite directions. So anybody born with a lot of Pisces energy will have certain conflicts in their life where they don't know which way to go. Do I go into the real world or do I go into the spiritual world? Those are the two opposite directions that the fish are facing. And we know that Mary was put to that test when her father demanded that she admit that she was illegitimate, that her parents' marriage was void. That is the fish going in one direction, the direction of the real world. This is the reality, whether you like it or not. But she was totally conflicted because she wanted to go in the other direction where God says, well, that's not true. And her faith and her belief in the larger order says that this is not so. And that was an incredible struggle for Mary for many years, for several years, until she finally relented and went into the one direction to get back into the good graces of her father. So you can see that those two fishes, that Piscean central dilemma in her right there.
I think even listeners who don't know much about astrology, what's so incredible hearing this is these are the themes that
Yeah,
they see as well. So to hear about, the science behind astrology, it's going to be illuminating because that is what I think of Mary. I think she was caught between the physical realm and the material realm.
right,
And her whole life, as you said, she was put to the test. And then eventually, when she became Bloody Mary, she was able, I feel like, to take her power completely at that time.
right.
Does it
Well,
change over her
yes,
life?
that is what we're going to talk about right now because now, so first of all, she has a son, an ego. Remember, the sun is the ego. She has a son that is in its nature a conflicting situation. So she's already there. Pisces is a difficult sign to be. I don't have any planet in Pisces myself, but it's not an easy sign because of that. It's hard to put your finger on Pisces. You know what I mean? It's a difficult energy, I think, to function in because of that conflict. But now she has the conflict of the sun versus the moon, and the moon is in Virgo. Now, Virgo, I understand very well because I'm a Virgo sun. But Virgo functions much better as a sun than it does as a moon. Because as a sun, as an ego, you could be persnickety and you could be perfectionist and you could be right and you can be detail oriented and you could do all of that, be really happy, get a job as a bookkeeper and, which is what I did too. And, that kind of thing. You could be very, very, very happy with a Virgo sun because you have a lot of control. But the moon is not the conscious part of you. The moon is the unconscious part of you. And when you have the moon in a sign like that, like Virgo, it's not the best place for a moon. The moon is better in Pisces. She would have been better off to have the sun in Virgo and the moon in Pisces because the moon wants to be nebulous and encompassing and comforting. The moon is not in being so particular about things. But because she had the moon in Virgo, she was. And that moon in Virgo is in that eighth house of transformation. So that's going to play a huge role. The moon in Virgo, I would say, if you want to go and whittle it down to a very basic idea is, am I right? I'm right. The need to be right is a Virgo thing. And it's okay if you're conscious about it, but if you're not conscious about it, if it's there, then that moon is going to continuously harass you your whole life. And so this moon was in this eighth house, which is a very deep, conscious, unconscious area of the psyche. So this moon is what caused her constant, that drive to have it the way she needed to have it. And later on, obviously, when she became queen, I would say that moon took over in a lot of ways and became that need to have things the way she felt was the right way to have it. It basically goes just from being right to being righteous. There's a difference between being right and being righteous,
That
you
is
know?
very interesting. And it's a great summation of her. That's very,
Absolutely. So that's the Virgo moon. So one other thing you can definitely see about Mary is contemporary dialogue that there is about her. Obviously, the people who are resurrecting Mary's reputation are way more attached to her Pisces sun. They go on about how she was compassionate and empathetic and a good person and loving and all of that. That's the Pisces sun part of her, and it is there. We're not denying that it's there. And the Bloody Mary thing is the Virgo moon, and that's more unconscious. And so when you see people, generally people who have a great controversy about themselves, somebody like Richard III, for example, or Mary here, people who are in the midst of a controversy about who they were they a good person or a bad person? Are you a good witch or a bad witch? They generally have an opposition. They have an opposition in their chart. And that opposition in their chart explains why a certain segment of the population goes to the one energy and another segment of the population actually sees the other side of them. And so one who we will not name also has a full moon, if you're
ah.
American. So basically, and there you have it right there. Again, the polarity. Richard III had an opposition, not between sun and moon, but between sun and Mars. Sun in Libra makes him the just king. Mars in Aries makes him the killer of the prince's tower. So basically, that's what you're looking at with Mary. When we go to Elizabeth, we're going to look at her opposition. But Mary's is definitely, I would say, a very challenging thing that she had to carry around with her, this full moon. This full moon helped her in some ways. It gave her incredible strength and boldness, but it also just tore her apart on the inside as well. But here's the thing that she had and that Elizabeth also had. Are you familiar with what a T-square is? Have you
No.
ever heard of that? Okay. A T-square is a common signature. It's not rare. It's fairly common, but not everybody has it. It's when you have an opposition like this moon sun, and then those two planets go and make a further square to a third planet. And that third planet becomes what is known as the apex planet. And that third planet then becomes the driving force. It's almost like the third planet is the chauffeur, and the two, oppositional planets are the backseat drivers that are bickering with each other. And the third planet is the one driving the car. That's probably the best way to describe a T-square. It's a very dynamic signature that many people have, most very super successful people have, because it's a driving force. It gets you up in the morning. It's like, let's go, let's go, let's go kind of thing. And so what happens is the conflict presented by the opposition tries to get to be resolved by that apex planet. That apex planet tries to sort it all out, tries to work it through. And so when someone has a T-square in the chart, you look at the apex planet, and then you see what choices they're going to make to try to work out this inner turmoil. And the apex planet for Mary is Saturn. It is the malefic. It is not a nice planet, okay? It's not Neptune or something. It's Saturn, and it's Saturn in Sagittarius. So what do we know about Saturn? We know that Saturn is a hard driving, challenging type situation. We all need Saturn in our chart. If we didn't have Saturn in our chart, every one of us will just stay in bed all day long. Okay, so basically Saturn is important. But for Mary, it's in the 11th house. So now you're dealing with politics, you're dealing with factions, you're dealing with what group does she belong to compared to what group someone else belongs to. And Sagittarius is the energy of higher purpose. I also have Saturn in Sagittarius, and my whole life has been about what is the meaning of life. And my work has always been about what is the meaning of Saturn is higher purpose. And it basically is reflected in organized religion, in education, in publishing today, but maybe not back then. It is basically a higher purpose energy is Sagittarius. So what does Mary latch onto? She latches onto the Catholic Church, which is Saturn in Sagittarius, right there. She latches onto that higher purpose. The whole, my understanding, and the most generous way to look at Mary in relation to the Marian persecutions is that she had a higher purpose for the souls of those people who would not come back to the fold. It didn't help the people that had already decided they wanted to read the Bible and do all of that. But from her point of view, she was thinking of it in terms of a higher purpose thing. We have to try to at least give her that as far as her motivation for it. And I am not familiar enough with all the ins and outs of Mary and that situation to be able to say, well, when did she do this and when did she do that? But basically, Saturn in Sagittarius is that quest for a higher purpose, is that quest for meaning. And it usually, in the society of the Tudors, it most reflects the religious conflicts. Sagittarius is both the Catholic Church and the evolving Protestant Church, depending on which one was in power. And it was church in general. It was belief. It was faith, which was basically driving force of the entire era. So Mary is a person who has this inner polarity that she then resolves with Saturn, with a malefic energy. So basically, yes, Mary, I think I've always thought to be the most tragic of all the people in the Tudor era. And as you can see, she was given a very, very challenging hand. She really was. But she also had some amazing stuff. She had, for example, right next to the ascendant, do you see where the ascendant is at 6 degrees? And then you see Mars at 14 degrees Capricorn. Well, my goodness, 14 degrees Capricorn is, I believe, if I have it correct, was the Mars of Henry V. It's the general's Mars. It's the way she rode into London for her to claim her throne. It's an incredible fighting spirit.
Yeah.
And it's exactly opposite her father, who was 14 degrees Cancer. So there you have her Mars is at 14-degree Capricorn, exactly opposite to Henry VIII's 14-degree Cancer sun.
Wow.
And so there you have the synastry right there and the relationship. And then her mother, Catherine of Aragon, was also a Capricorn sun. So she had a lot of Sagittarius, but Capricorn was her sun. So she basically fought for her mother. That's an amazing signature. If she had just done a few things a little differently, she could have been the basically warrior queen of the Tudors. Then she also has Venus in Pisces. Venus in Pisces is very elevated Venus. And that's the signature of when people talk about her love and her devotion. And of course, she was very much in love with Philip. And so she has a lot of really, really good qualities, but she also was a pivotal person. I think her role that she was forced to play, regardless of who she really was, she was forced to play a pivotal moment of the Tudor dynasty. She was forced to take on the maleficness of Saturn in order to have things go a certain way. The other thing about Pisces is that it is the sign of the martyr. Was this challenging sign for her, and the way it all turned out, a kind of martyrdom in some way? Do you know what I mean? Basically, you know, that's an interesting angle because Pisces is the sign of the martyr as well. So there's a tendency to think of oneself as a martyr in Pisces, possibly, you know. Anyway, so that is what I wanted to bring up with Mary. I wanted to bring up one more thing.
Yes.
And that is in the seventh house of marriage. That's where she has Jupiter. So obviously, anybody that has Jupiter in their seventh house is going to be married, most likely, or at least have, if you're in the modern world, a major relationship, because Jupiter is about expansion. And the fact that she was absolutely going to marry and have that marriage be significant, obviously in the end to her detriment, but still she managed to get it and be married, is shown by Jupiter in the seventh house. That would be a destiny right there, that she was going to engage with an important marriage, you know, and she did. So I wanted to bring that up because the seventh house for Elizabeth is so very different.
Don't worry, it's not over yet. Join me for part 2 of my interview with Sasha Marks, the Tudor Astrologer, as she breaks down Queen Elizabeth I's chart like you've never heard it before. Now streaming on YouTube.